I believe that most people wish they could have a clear image of where they are and where they might be headed. At our company, Art Within, we use people's top 10 films to show them the narrative that God has them in. You see, we believe that when a movie moves you, that it's God who's trying to speak to you. These are my top 10 films. And guess what? If you want to know what my core desires are, my top 10 films can show you. If you want to know what lies that Satan is trying to get me to believe, my top 10 films can show you. If you want to know the character traits that I wrestle with, my top 10 films can show you. This and so much more God has revealed to me through this unexpected place of my top 10 films. But this is me individually. What about collectively? Could this work for America? Can our movies help us see more clearly our culture's narrative? And this is what we long for at Q, isn't it? To get a clear picture of the conversation that our culture is having in order to engage it. But what if we could get ahead of the curve? What if we could not just engage culture, but lead culture? By looking to our films, I believe we can. So let's dive in by rewinding the clock to our past narrative. It was a little movement we called postmodernism. In film, it started in the late 60s, surged in the 70s, and peaked in the 90s. Reflecting the skepticism we had in our institutions, these postmodern films had at their core disillusionment, deconstruction, gray, and a search for deeper meaning. These are all good things. But then something happened, and maybe we didn't even know it at the time, but the narrative shifted, and postmodernism actually faded. Two events ushered in this new narrative for our nation. The first is an event that we laugh about now, but admit it, you were scared then, and that was Y2K, right? Everybody remember that one? But the point of no return was, of course, September 11th. I think we still don't realize to this day how monumental 9/11 was in dramatically shifting our narrative. Respectfully, here are some of the images of 9/11. And I want you to notice in these images, explosions and fire, collapsing buildings, debris in the air, and people running in the streets. Now, let me show you a movie genre that has flourished since 9/11. And I want you to notice the explosions, the buildings collapsing, the debris in the air, and the people running in the streets. These films show us what it looks like the day after tomorrow, or after Earth, or when the White House is down. And as you can see, these movies give us a clear picture of our subconscious fear that our world might be attacked again, only worse. So we play out various disaster drills because we want to see if and how we will survive. And dystopian tales like Hunger Games and Divergent cast a futuristic vision of what life might be like if we do survive. So what do these films show us about where we are in 2015? Well, it looks like we're scared to death, right? The good news is that fear is not the only theme of our current narrative. There's another major theme, and it was introduced at the 2004 Democratic Convention.
Hope in the face of difficulty. Hope in the face of uncertainty. The audacity of hope. In the end, that is God's greatest gift to us, the bedrock of this nation, a belief in things not seen.
Hope. Over the last 14 years, the movie landscape has been dominated by three genres of hope. And what's cool is that these three genres show us what our hope is built upon. The first genre supports Obama's statement that hope is built upon a belief in things not seen. With the fantasy genre, we voyage into unseen worlds from platform 9 3/4 to Hogwarts, or through the wardrobe into Narnia, or out of the Shire and into the depths of Middle-earth. In these magical worlds, wizards use their supernatural power for good. And speaking of good, after 9/11, we don't want the gray of postmodernism. Evil and good are clearly delineated, and good kicks evil's butt. For Americans, these images give us reassurance that in the midst of the complexity of a war on terror, that good will ultimately triumph over evil. In the second genre, DreamWorks and Pixar exploded onto the scene, invited us into worlds that we never thought to explore before. Likewise, Disney reemerged and rebooted their princess lines, restoring our belief in happily ever after. What's the basis for hope in the animation genre? Change. You see, if toys, cars, fish, rats, penguins, basically if every object and every animal in the animal kingdom can change, then so can we. And films like Wreck-It Ralph and Despicable Me show us that even bad guys can change. And finally, these are family films, being that family is the strongest evidence of change in the end. The last genre of hope is having its heyday right now. Yes, Forbes recently declared that Marvel is the new Pixar. In an unpredictable world where a villain might appear out of nowhere and threaten us, it's great to know that there's a Superman or woman who can be summoned to use their superpowers and provide us with real homeland security. The basis of hope in the superhero genre is that we have a defender against our villains, or better yet, we have a savior. So to recap, since 9/11, an unprecedented number of films have given us a picture of where we are, still very fearful, and yet holding on to a hope found outside of ourselves in supernatural worlds with supernatural powers. This is America's current top 10 list. The top 10 box office films for 2014. And you can clearly see all three genres are still represented, showing us that this is still our current narrative. But there is one outlier, American Sniper, which happened to be the #1 box office film in 2014. It also happened to be an Oscar nominee, which is significant. You see, while the movies that move us at the box office show us our current narrative, the Oscar nominees give us a picture of where our narrative is headed. If we look at the 2014 Oscars, we see something that has never happened in the history of the Oscars. 6 of the 9 Best Picture nominees were based on true stories. And if you remember, 12 Years a Slave won for Best Picture. Then this year, half of the Oscar nominees for Best Picture were based on true stories, with the 3 of the 4 remaining films having an art imitating life approach to filmmaking, Boyhood being the icon. In addition, other Oscar categories saw 4 more reality-based films nominated. God is using the Oscars to show us that moving forward, we want our worlds to be real, our change to be real, and our heroes to be real. We need the comfort to know that the story of hope we just watched actually happened. So the important thing to know is that we seem to be moving away from hope being found outside of ourselves to our hope being found inside of ourselves. What marked the 2015 Best Picture nominees was a common thread of our skills, our genius, and our determination that triumphs. As Alan Turing said in The Imitation Game, God didn't win the war, we did. So as we move forward, our basis for hope is us. We become hope. Now for Christians, this might sound like bad news, but looking for hope outside of ourselves has its downside too. For the last 14 years, we've been highly dependent on big government. So if the basis of hope is us, look for libertarians to gain traction in this coming election. But the best news is that our gospel actually follows the same trajectory we are on as a culture. God, who was outside of ourselves, came down to earth and lived with us, and then made a way for us to have supernatural power by living inside of us. So as we move forward, we have the opportunity to lead the cultural conversation by agreeing that yes, hope can be found inside of us, making known the great mystery that Christ in us, the hope of glory. Finally, I hope you'll take encouragement in seeing that God is at work in so many more places than we give him credit for, revealing himself. If you as a leader or your team are interested in what God might reveal through your top 10 films, then grab up one of our remaining slots. So this is a commercial we have this year at this web address. Thank you.